I'm gonna make an assumption right now. The preparation of a leader, listen to this, the preparation of a leader is as much of an excavation process as it is an elevation process. In other words, it causes us to have to think a little bit more deeply and to dig a little bit more effectively. And so that's one thing that's important to know, but I also think it's important to know where we dig, because you can, when as kids, you remember digging on the beach in the sand, and you start to dig in the beach and then the sand would all keep falling into the hole. Well, part of it is where are we digging, and where we're digging is in some a little bit of a foundation in what industrial organizational psychology has to tell us about something like teams. Because I could give you something pretty shallow, but I'm refusing to do that. I have a quote that I've been kind of marinating on this last week. My wife always laughs at me because I say marinating, which is not actually accurate. So I don't think I'm saying it wrong. And the quote is from a guy named C.S. Lewis. And this is the last chapter of one of his books. And it says this, regarding that whole idea of deeper excavation. Listen to what he says. Imagine writing a book and this is what you say to your readers. Everyone, this is his words, everyone has warned me. I'm going to insert a couple of my words as replacements for some of the things that he says, but most of it's his. Everyone has warned me not to tell you what I'm going to tell you in this last chapter. That's what he starts with. They all say the ordinary reader does not want, he uses the word theology, I'm going to say psychology. The ordinary reader doesn't want that. Give them plain practical religion. And I would say give them plain just practical stuff. Make it practical. And he says this, I have rejected their advice. I do not think the ordinary reader is such a fool. Those are his words. Can you imagine you're writing a chapter, not such a fool? Psychology means the science of the mind. And I think, these are still his words, any person who wants to think about human beings at all would like to have the clearest and most accurate ideas about them, which are available. And he says this, you are not children. Why should you be treated like children? I might argue that I'm a child some days. So, but anyway, he goes on, it's a lot he says, but my point is this, like we're gonna go there. We're gonna go a little bit deep regarding this topic. I'm not gonna be shallow about it. I'm gonna say, like, what do we know about this? And one of the things that's interesting about this concept of whole and intentional teams is some of the things that came to mind. Like I had a leader who called me several years ago. I remember the parking lot I was sitting in, and he calls me and he says, Rob, I got a question. I got to talk to you this morning about this. How do you know when you've lost your team? And that conversation was probably 7 years ago, and he was leading a virtual team across the world. And he was feeling this deeply. How do I know when I've lost my team? That's when I think about the word teams, it's the first thing that came to mind. And then when most people think about teams, I think a lot of us think about, I wrote down laser tag or team building. All right, so it's like, if you were a corporate child or a corporate person through the 80s and 90s, you were involved in a lot of team building activities. I did this work for years, and I actually worked for a high ropes organization. There's longer stories about that when I was just getting started. I will tell you that games matter because they replicate the truth. In other words, they replicate something that actually is occurring. So when you've been out on a ropes course, let's say there's kind of like you're feeling a little bit like you're at risk, and the facilitator taught the team how to catch a person if they fall off a ropes thing. You know what I'm saying? So some of you have done this. Maybe it's high or medium or low ropes kind of activities, but they taught you how to support a person if they fall. They taught you to put your foot back and actually to be ready for them to fall with your hands up. And so often what would happen is that I would get a chance to observe this team in the workplace, and then I would see them out on the ropes course, and you'd have that one dude, hands in his pockets, standing with his feet together, not paying attention. And most of the time, I will tell you that that person is the same person that when important things were happening in the workplace was standing there or sitting there, hands in his pockets, not paying attention and not really caring about what's going on with other people. So very quickly, team building activities, they kind of replicate truth. But I will tell you that I think, and I think that there's a lot of meaning. I did a lot of that work for years, but I think in many cases they did little to actually solve the problem until they got to a deeper level of assumptions, until we got to something deeper. What it did do is build awareness, but without that deeper conversation regarding, so what is change all about? So I want to start off by this. Before I get into that, let me tell you, what is a team? What is a team? And it's funny, like Daniel said, I've taught this for 25 years, and it's in every organizational behavior textbook. I will give you the simple definition that I think is really important. And one of the first things I would educate a graduate student on is the difference between a group and a team. Let's get this straight. What is the difference? And the fundamental difference is this: that a group of people exists for no purpose. A team comes together to share, to solve some problem together. They come together for a purpose, and that's going to come back and back and back and back around. They come together. There's a reason that they come together. Fundamentally, they're different that way. And it's interesting because it calls out something, right? So that purpose matters, like a reason for being here matters, a direction matters. I'm a mountain bike, not well, but I do once a week. I took a lesson once up at Whistler in British Columbia. And I remember my instructor, his name was Mish, which is just the coolest name. And he told us this, he said, look where you want to go, because you will go where you look. Try that out as a principle for life. Like, that's why intention matters. I think it works in most cases. Look where you want to go. And his point was, they teach this motorcycle riding too. If you look at the ditch, where are you going? You're going to the ditch. So wherever you point your eyes is where you're going to go. And I think that's an interesting thing. So when it comes to a team, it's a team that exists for a purpose. One of the fundamental reasons that teams probably don't work that well is because they don't even know where to look. So having some sense of direction matters. What this also brings up regarding teams is what in industrial organizational psychology describes as a level of analysis issue. A level of there are at least 3 levels of analysis from a psychological perspective. Are you with me? Give me a nod, people. Some of my friends on there. Okay, I'm seeing you. Thank you. Thank you. Individual level of analysis. That means we study individuals, right? There's a group level of analysis, which is typically where the team literature sits. And then there's an organizational level of analysis. And that paying attention to what we're studying matters if we are really going to get to true. And this is what IO psychologists are responsible for, is like, what is valid stuff that's out there that we could understand, as opposed to some kind of popular book that just says, it just translates individual level things to team level things. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time hovering over that, but I want to suggest to you this. If a team exists for a purpose, there are 3 questions that the WiLD toolkit that some of you have used, that it asks at the very beginning on this fundamental levels of analysis issue and question. And they relate to the concept of whole and intentional teams. The first question that the toolkit asks you is this, and this is a provocative. So here's the thing. When you start to excavate, you heard me say about leader development, what happens when you start to dig a hole? You hit things. Okay, you run into a big rock and you're like, okay, I got to deal with the rock. Do I go around the rock? Do I, you know what I mean? Do I just leave the rock because it's kind of cool in my hole I'm digging? Or you hit gravel, you hit some other kind of earth you got to deal with, or the worst thing in your yard. Like my wife we're going to have a project to pull this giant bush out of our yard. So when we get the root ball out, we're going to hit roots. That's one of the hardest things, right? Do I cut the thing? I can't fit my saw in there. So the point is this: as you start to excavate on things, you bump into things. You bump into questions that cause you to go, I got to deal with that. And that's why whole leader development is more than just kind of, you're great, go lead. It's an excavation process. So with regard to teams, here's the deal. One of the first questions in this level of analysis question that the toolkit asks you is, what is your organization attempting to accomplish? Right? It's an organizational level question. You cannot believe how many CEOs we work with who, when they're honest, say, and some of these businesses are making what's the word? Like cadoodles of money. They're like really successful financially. And they're like, I don't know. And so I think there's no shame in that. Like figuring out what is it we're trying to accomplish this year is an important first excavation question that relates to the team. Because here's the second question the tool asks you. What is your team or group trying to accomplish in the context of that organization's mission? Right? Because that purpose isn't just the team's purpose. The team probably depending on how large your organization is, exists within the context of a larger organization. And think about this. It's fascinating, right? Imagine if the WiLD Leaders team, the part of our team that's responsible for conversation with a bunch of people on Friday. I don't really know why. Like kind of purposeless, rudderless. And we go like, let's just try. Should we use technology? I don't know. Let's try something out. It's like we need some specificity, right? In our, what are we trying to do? What are we trying to create? And then the last question that's asked in this threading of questions in the toolkit is this. Whether you are clear about your personal contribution to your organization or not, what skills, competencies, and knowledge do you bring that propel your organization's missions forward? So in other words, the team kind of exists within the center of what is the organization doing? And now I'm thinking about myself and what is my contribution to that team? And if we could, maybe if we understood those things, direction matters, that purpose and identifying those things and working through the excavation process and hitting the rocks, and to keep doing that, because there's a trickle down effect. If there's no organizational mission, there's no integrated or aligned team mission. And if there's no team mission, there's no chance to integrate or align my individual mission. So I think that's one piece to think about. The other thing I want to mention briefly is this. I wrote down this question as the next part. So, okay, we know what a team is. We know that there's levels of analysis. There's questions we need to excavate as we get more intentional about them. Why is it so hard? Why is there even an area that, why is there a focus on teams? And there's a lot of different directions that we could go with this. I think one of the things that I just wanted to highlight briefly is that when you're talking about changing, you're talking about whole intentional teams, most of us are thinking, how do I change something? How do I make it better? And one of the realities I think about regarding this, but this is really more deeply a cultural issue. And culture, organizational culture, I have shared is a system of artifacts. It's like physical things. It's also things we say about ourselves. And Megan can share with you our cultural charter for WiLD Leaders if some of you want to see that. The researchers and thinkers in the culture space would say is it's most of what culture is assumptions. Things that we just assume about behaviors. These are patterns of the way we behave together in a team functioning environment. And there's all kinds of literature out there on like, how do you change things? That we won't get into. We might have another topic in the future. Like, what does the change literature tell us about what change looks like? I will tell you this, that when it comes to changing assumptions, it means we put that what we say about ourselves is aligned with what we're actually going to do, and we're willing to work through the tension that's created when we ask people to change long enough for the change to actually stick, to build new patterns. And it's so fascinating. One of the people, a lot of you have this question is probably going through your minds right now, is like, Rob, like, so what are some of the fundamental issues? And there's a lot of issues in this, but one of them is this, is that we've been working with a lot of organizations on their own cultural charters, using ours as an example. And one of the leaders last week, we were working through this document, and it was like they came up with 12 value statements about what it was going to be about to be a part of their team. And here's what I said, because one of the leaders asked me this. He said, should I frame this and put it on the wall? He was super excited. Like, should I frame this? Let's put it around the office. Let's get it out there. Let's share it. Let's do it that way. And I said, absolutely not. Do not put this on the wall. And one of the reasons, like some of you have worked, you're nodding your heads at me. You've seen those, right? Here's the 12 value statements. So, and if you have them, it's not horrible. Don't hear me saying that. But here would be my hope. The statement of culture around behavioral assumptions, that's a living and breathing document. And what I mean by that is what I asked those, I was working with two CEOs who own a business together. And what I told them is, I want you to, when you take this to your team, I want you to lead with, this is not what you're going to live into, people. This is, let me tell you about my aspirations for how I am attempting to live into this. It's a part of their humanity. And what I was pushing them on is anything that's in this list that you are not willing to wrestle with, and to say, let me tell you about the two that come most easily to me. Let me tell you about the two on that list of 12 that are most difficult. Once you can talk that way, now it's a living and breathing document that may change slightly, but it also is something that probably won't change much if it is true to what you really believe is important about how human beings would interact together as a team. I want to give you just real quickly here, just a couple of things. This is quick literature that might surprise some of you. This is a whole perspective on teams. Listen to this. Some people assume that diverse teams are more effective. And what I mean by that is teams full of people who are different. Literature is mixed on that. All right. Here's the deal. If you want innovation, diversify. Diverse teams tend to innovate better. If you want efficiency, create teams that share something. So now you're like, so what do I do? Probably a little bit of both, right? The reality is that I think giving permission that diversity and sameness are both important, but play different roles at different moments where a team is asked to do something. And the other thing is this, is that I wrote team members are people too, that teams are made up of individuals and we can't escape that. And so us understanding ourselves and our own contribution to teams, which is probably a whole nother conversation, is really, really critical. And there's a whole, if you've gotten into our conversation regarding differentiation and the effect of every one of you showing up as your most, working hard at your own emotional maturity and showing up as a composed version of yourself, that there's a whole stream of thinking around what does that look like in a group context? Because your capacity to show up, like the whole concept of emotional intelligence did not get very sophisticated until the concept of emotional intelligence within a system was brought into the conversation. Because the reality is that none of us are attempting to be emotionally intelligent within a vacuum as leaders. We're doing that within a system of human beings, which is a whole nother conversation we'll have later, or we can give you some other resources. So here are my take action things based on what I said today. I'll try to land this plane. All right. Number one, define the goal. Why are we here? With as much specificity as possible. What is the team trying to accomplish? If we don't have that, what are we? We're not a team, we are a group. All right. Number two, this is one of the things I would suggest. We have to, this is so foundational. I didn't even talk about, identify the competency mix. So now that you know where you're going, kind of figuring out the competencies of different team members you need or have is probably key. Number three, it doesn't start with something we put on the wall, but a statement of values and assumptions about that we embody. A living statement of who we are aspiring to be together that is just as important as the competency statement. What are some of the things that how are we going to be together as a team would be a very whole conversation. Number four, recruiting for readiness and emotional maturity. Don't just recruit for competence. Look for team members who are going to say like, I am wanting to become a better version of myself. They may use different language, but I just don't have the time. It's not my thing. If someone's not quite ready, then maybe come back when you're ready to stretch and to learn. And then also I can support that. And then number five is leaders living out the values that they embody. That us being willing to live out the things that are important is part of what will create a team environment that will help other people be invited to be themselves, so that team begins to become more cohesive. So there's just a few of my thoughts. You go where you need to go. This is a massive space to jump into, as Daniel said.
I love that.
So one thing I saw in the chat, by the way, this is like a really good book, like not a so-so book. This is a really good book. So man, save that chat if you can. Kevin, you mentioned something that was interesting. This is where my geek brain goes nuts, is you mentioned like money doesn't matter, the purpose matters. You said it better than that, but I would say it's interesting in the research that money does matter, but it doesn't matter in the ways that we think. Like, you know what I mean? It is a part of the equation, but it's not enough. But you think about this, a lot of business people I know, their deepest assumption is that money is the driver. So, so it does matter. So I wouldn't dismiss that, but without purpose, it's kind of interesting. Here's the thing I want to leave you with though. I just thought like, what do I feel inspired in this moment? Ask yourself this question. What would make you a better team member? I'm asking myself that today, like what would make me a better team member? And that's maybe something we think about when we get our moments this Friday, is a part of being it starts with us. So grateful for all of you bringing your wisdom and just being in community together. So I hope you'll come back and share this so we can help other people who need it. Know there's a place.
Thanks, Rob. See you all.